Hello and welcome, dear student. I welcome you again to this wonderful lesson. Remember, we are doing social studies in Standard 8. Last time, we looked at the aspect of culture, and that was in unit number, unit number 6. Today, in unit number 7, we are looking at the Greek civilization. The Greek civilization. Just as I said last time we met, I said that this one is also an aspect of culture where we look at the Greek civilization and how it rose and the things that they were doing and the contributions or the impact that they have done to this world. So it's really another aspect of history where we look at the Greeks and what they have done in the world and what they have contributed to us. So be there, follow through the lesson up to the end and get one or two things in this lesson. Now, before we proceed, I just want to remind you of the work. The work that we have in Standard 8 Social Studies is this. So we have a total of 26 units, and today we are on unit number 7. So remember, all this work is for you. If you are to pass exams, you have to go through all this work thoroughly, understand the aspects that are talked about in each and every unit. So there, what is needed is for you to follow everything. All these things, they are already on video. When you are in class, you miss some of the aspects, just get just enter YouTube or whatever means you can do to find these lessons, grab them and follow them so that at least you know them better. So be there, let us be together up to the end. Now, the Greek civilization. The Greek civilization started along the Aegean or Aegean and the Mediterranean Sea in Greece. So Greece is a mountainous country with swift rivers. So when we talk of Greece or Greek civilization, we are saying that it started between the Aegean Sea and the Mediterranean Sea in between. When you have the map of the world, you will see that there is the Mediterranean Sea in North Africa, and in Europe there is also Aegean Sea. So in between Mediterranean Sea and Aegean Sea, the land that is between, that was where there was the Greek civilization. Now, at the very end of this lesson, I have prepared for you a video. So in that video, of course it is long enough, but I want you to follow that video, because after this brief explanation about the Greeks, that video explains more detail of what happened about the Greek civilization. So follow that video that I'll give you at the end. But for the sake of our content, follow through, listen to this content first before you indulge into that video. So civilization started around 500 BC. Of course, this civilization started way back, long time ago. So by this time, the 500 BC, that's when it took some shape of establishment. But before even 500 BC, there were people who were living, they were following a certain culture there. But from 500 BC, that's when we see now establishment of something like an empire or one civilization. The Greeks, they lived in city-states. So the Greeks were living in city-states. That's what we are talking about here. The Greeks lived in city-states. So city-states, they are independent towns. For example, we have in Malawi, we have districts. We call them districts. But in ancient Greece, they were the city-states, to say, right? Blantyre, then it was to be regarded as a city and a country or an independent country. We go to Chikwao, then that one is a town and a country on its own. Like that, Nkadabe, Kalonga, and the like. All those district, that what we call district in Greece, then they were calling them the city-states. So those city-states were independent of each other. So most famous city-states were Athens and Sparta. Most famous city-states were Athens and Sparta. So of all those city-states, the most famous was Athens and Sparta. So the other city-states were Thebes, Syracuse, Miletus, and Corinth. So there were many city-states, but the most two famous, you have to remember them, Sparta and Athens. Now, let us look at the factors. What are the factors that led to the rise or to the growth of the Greece civilization? The Greece civilization. Number one is the trade. Trade. So the Greeks, they traded. So in Athens, especially the city-states of Athens, was a trading city-state. So Athens was a trading city-state. Another factor for the rise, or another factor for growth of Greek civilization was security. So Sparta was a military state. So Sparta there, it was a military. It was known for military. Therefore, their territory was well secured. Language again. All city-states, they spoke the same language. They spoke the Greek language. So all city-states were speaking the Greek language. Religion also resulted into the growth. Religion, so the Greeks shared a common religion. So they had the common religion. They were worshipping the same gods. So they were united in religion. And also games. The Greeks, they met every 4 years for the competition in various games near Mount Olympus. Have you ever heard about Olympic Games? Olympic Games. The Olympic Games, they originated from the Greeks. So what we are saying here is that the Greeks, from all the city-states, they were meeting once in 4 years to meet at Mount Olympus, where they were competing in different games. So from there, we see that even up today, we have the Olympic Games, but it started with the Greeks. They were meeting once in 4 years. Love of arts. So the Greeks had love for arts. So the Greeks there, they loved arts so much. Paintings, carvings, different things. So that one again made to the rise of the Greek civilization. And willingness to learn. The Greeks were very open to new ideas and were ready to learn. The Greeks were ready to learn. Are you ready to learn yourself? Sometimes we are not open. Some people are not open to new ideas. So not about the Greeks. The Greeks, they wanted to learn. So that is good in life when someone wants to learn, is eager, is open enough to say, how do you do this? Can you teach me this? That is how we develop. So the Greek civilization rose because of their willingness to learn. They were open enough to new ideas. Now, let us look at the reasons for the decline. How did this Greek civilization decline? The Greek civilization declined. How? The city-states began to work independently, and this weakened their unity. Let me take that again. The Greek city-states began to work independently, and this weakened their unity. Remember, we talked about the city-states. They were really independent, but they were united in certain things that brought the Greek civilization together. Like what? We talked of religion, we talked of Olympic Games, we talked of language. But then, in the passage of time, those Greek city-states, they started doing things independently, doing the games independently, worshipping independently. As a result, then the Greek civilization started to go down. And also the war between Sparta and Athens. Look at that. They were invaded at first, then later on they started to fight the city-states. For example, if you talk of Malawi, Blantyre against Mangochi, then you see there that there can be no unity in Malawi if districts, they do fight against each other. So it happened in Greece civilization, that Sparta and Athens, they started to fight. Then the Greek civilization started to go down. Another thing is the foreign invasion by the Macedonians and the Persians. So you know, when you are divided, usually the enemies or the foreigners, they can get advantage of that. So we see here the Macedonians and the Persians, they took advantage of their disunity. Then they attacked the Greeks. The Macedonians and the Persians, they came and attacked the Greeks, and their civilization started to go down as well. And also mass production of sculptures led to poor quality of products. So they were producing these sculptures, the things, we said that they loved arts. As a result, they were just producing many things without putting much effort on that. Therefore, they produced many things without quality. As a result, people could not buy those things. So there was a mass production of sculptures. Sculptures are the things that are carved. They're carved from wood, maybe they are made from clay and the like, from stones and the like. Those are sculptures. So sculptures may be things of animals. The things of animals like the elephants, maybe the faces of people that are carved from the rocks. So that is what is called a sculpture. So they started to make those things of poor quality. Having looked at that, now let's look at the contributions. What are the contributions of the Greek civilization to the modern world? What has the Greeks contributed to the world? Number one, I have here the alphabet. The alphabet we use today was derived from the Greeks. So you see that the alphabet that we use, A, B, C, D, it was started by the Greeks. So the Greeks, is really good to study about the Greeks because we are emulating many things. Here we are talking of the alphabet. Number two, system of government. Democracy we use today evolved from the Greeks. Today there is democracy in Malawi. There are so many parties, multi-party. Yeah. So in that way, we are not the first people to start that multi-party democracy. It started with the Greeks. It started with the Greeks. So democracy that we use today, it all started way back by the Greeks. And also science. The Greeks were great scientists and made important discoveries in astronomy and mathematics. So there were many people there in Greece during that Greek civilization. The scientists, they studied astronomy, they studied the stars and the heavenly bodies. They were studying those things. And mathematics, they were doing mathematics, studying mathematics, theories of mathematics, Pythagoras theorems and the like. Many other things they studied. So science, today we still study those things. Astronomy, we study it. Mathematics, we study it, but the first were the Greeks. So it's good to learn about the Greeks because they were the first to do some of these things, scientific things that we are doing today. The games as well. The games, the Olympic Games, which are held every 4 years, originated from the Greeks. Today, the Olympic Games are still there. Countries do participate in the Olympic Games every 4 years, once every 4 years. So it is just exactly just as the Greeks were doing. Once in every 4 years, we said they were meeting where? Yes, on Mount Olympus. At Mount Olympus, there they were doing the Greek games there. So today we are still having, the world is still having those, the Olympic Games. They are still conducted once in every 4 years. And that is a direct emulation, a direct copy from the Greek civilization. Then lastly, I have here architecture. Most of today's arts and architecture is a reflection of the Greek creativity. So most of the things that we do art today, when we admire things, nice drawing, nice carvings, it's a direct copy from the Greeks, the Greek creativity. They were so creative, they could imagine things and make them into existence, carving them from the rocks and building them, all those things. So we see to it that the Greeks, they have really contributed a lot to the modern world. Now, just as I promised at the beginning of the lesson, that I'm going to give you a small video. Of course, it's a little bit longer, but I ask you to follow through this clip because it is having the whole content of the Greek civilization. Some of the things that we have talked here, they are also repeated in that video. So follow through and see what happened about the Greek civilization.
You might think we already know everything about ancient Greece. The Parthenon, the 300 Spartans, and blind Homer's Iliad and Odyssey are familiar to all. Yet there were far more than 300 Spartans. The Parthenon was actually built as a kind of central bank, and no such unified state as ancient Greece with Athens as its capital ever existed. The Trojan War was as distant in time to Alexander the Great as the Vikings are to ourselves. So let's try to get our heads around ancient Greece, and hopefully a little quicker than in 2,000 years. "3,716 years ago, the pyramids of Egypt were already standing, and Babylon was the world's first megapolis, home to a prototype of the Tower of Babel. On Crete, however, a mysterious civilization was flourishing. It had 3-storied palaces, and all this with no defenses. The Cretans apparently led a relatively peaceful life, admiring flowers, blue monkeys, and beautiful women, walked around topless, while the men preferred loincloths or skirts. The Cretans had a navy and their own writing system, and nobody has yet succeeded in deciphering them. Until one day, on the island of Thera, the modern-day wedding paradise of Santorini, all this ended in the greatest volcanic eruption in European history. Part of Thera sank beneath the waves, presumably giving rise to the myth of Atlantis. Tsunamis 100 meters high and vast ash clouds stretching for thousands of miles around. Crete never recovered from this eruption, and invaders soon swarmed in. The once peaceful island then filled with bronze weapons and tablets written in a new, strange language, which turned out to be the earliest known form of Greek, spoken by warlike tribes, which had settled the nearby Greek mainland, building such cities as Thebes, Athens, Mycenae, and Pylos. But these cities already sheltered behind 6-meter walls. Life here was not peaceful at all. A few centuries later, the Greeks themselves explained them with legends of cyclopean builders and were no longer aware that any other civilization had come before them on Crete. By this logic, even the half-bull Minotaur was half Greek. Nobody batted an eyelid at the fact that games with bulls were a purely Cretan form of entertainment. Greeks appropriated everything they met on their way with great virtuosity. In conquering Crete, they had conquered the seas. Marine trade saw them grow even richer. Almost all the inscriptions found among the heaps of gold in the tombs of Mycenae are financial accounts. Mycenae took the lead in the fight against Troy in Homer's Iliad. As recently as 150 years ago, this story was considered a fairy tale until a millionaire and amateur archaeologist, Heinrich Schliemann, excavated Mycenae, and Troy, a replica of the legendary Trojan horse, now stands here. Archaeologists have indeed found traces of fire and destructions at Troy, but this was accompanied by the decline of virtually all regional settlements. Unceasing attacks by barbarian tribes turned the whole Mediterranean into a war zone. The next 400 years were a dark age. Literacy fell into oblivion, leaving us with nothing to read about the events then taking place. Fortunately, what we do have is Homer. Everybody has heard about the blind poet, the author of the Iliad and the Odyssey. In actual fact, we don't know what Homer looked like, or when he lived, whether he was one man or many. But even though the Iliad and Odyssey were written down after the Dark Ages, the daily routines of its characters take us right back to this time. Odysseus, for instance, was only king by virtue of his larger flocks of pigs and goats. His father slept on the ground in ashes with his slaves. Homer's characters were illiterate and used heads of cattle in place of money, a far cry from Crete and Mycenae with their three-storied palaces. What had happened? The Mycenaean civilization was destroyed by the Dorians, who, though Greek, were totally savage. The earlier population either hid in the mountains or fled to the east. Of all the achievements of the previous civilization, the Dorians left only the essentials, the sailing ship and the potter's wheel. It took a further 4 centuries for them to start adding the most primitive depictions of animals and people. At around the same time, the turn of the 9th and 8th centuries BC, the Greeks in Ionia borrowed a completely new alphabet from their Phoenician neighbors. This bore little resemblance to the linear writing styles of Crete and Mycenae. Do you recognize the modern Greek letters? The fog of Dark Ages had started to clear. Only here do we begin to recognize ancient Greece, the country that never actually existed. This was no state with an established border or capital, but rather a multitude of distinct and completely independent cities, polises. How did this come about? Greece is a land divided by sea and mountains into separate little parts, of which only a handful was suitable for agriculture. Even grain had to be imported. But why not grow it yourself, over there, across the sea? Thus, the great colonization began. If the first historians are to be believed, Miletus alone founded 90 colonies. The heel of the Italian boot was colonized too, followed by the alphabet that would form the basis for Latin and take over the world. Greek civilization spread from the modern-day Rostov-on-Don to Marseille, laying the foundations of the French wine industry. Fragments of amphorae scattered from Gibraltar to Georgia. These were containers for grain and wine. The latter was diluted with water in proportions of 1 to 3. Only barbarians would drink it neat. For trading purposes, coins appeared. Like the alphabet, these too were borrowed from their neighbors. According to Plato, a few centuries saw the Greeks settled around the Mediterranean like frogs around a pond. And yet, 2 cities, Athens and Sparta, almost did not participate in colonization. The Spartans descended from the warlike Dorians that had destroyed the Mycenaean civilization. They solved the land issue by conquering their neighbors in the broad, fertile region of Messenia. The locals were declared helots, something midway between slaves and serfs, and greatly outnumbered the Spartans proper. Sparta transformed from an ordinary polis into a military camp, whose main task was the prevention of any uprising. Things were quite different in Athens. Land hunger there had forced the aristocracy and the people to come to terms, and from this, democracy was born. But first, the tyrants took power. A Greek tyrant did not necessarily terrorize people, rather the opposite. Typically, he was an aristocrat who had quarreled with his peers, holding out promises of a better life. He used the common people's support to seize power by force. From then on, all his energies were focused on retaining power. The tyrant therefore made no reforms and simply drove any rival aristocrats from the polis. To divert the attention of the populace, tyrants introduced and fostered new festivals and cults. The dissatisfied could perish in the brazen bull. But you can't roast everyone. The tyrants were overthrown, and the suppressed aristocracy attempted to negotiate with the people, giving birth to Greek democracy. If an ancient Greek were to see modern democracy, he would just say one word: oligarchy. Ancient democracy was direct, with no representatives. If a polis had 6,000 citizens, they could all freely participate in the assembly. Admittedly, the number of citizens was less than a quarter of all residents, excluding slaves, women, and the migrant workers called metics. By the middle of the 6th century, the Ionian cities were most advanced, eclipsing Athens and Sparta. They were the first to master such Eastern innovations as the alphabet, coinage, mathematics, naval fleets, and complex trade logistics. Meanwhile, a sudden threat appeared to their rear: the vast Persian Empire. Miletus still hoped to preserve its independence, and with Athenian aid attempted to resist. Unfortunately, this was in vain, and the Persians torched the city and pressed on. Their attempts to subdue Greece lasted 20 years. We owe our knowledge of this to the first historian, Herodotus. According to his account, as many Greeks fought for the Persians as supported Athens and Sparta. How did they win? The first reason was military innovation. At the Battle of Marathon, the Greeks used the phalanx, a body of troops fighting in close formation. The Persians allegedly lost 6,400 men, and the Athenians a mere 192, plus the messenger who ran the 42,192 meters to Athens to announce the victory, after which he dropped dead. The second reason was already becoming a meme. At the narrow coastal pass of Thermopylae, King Leonidas led the 300 Spartans, who held back hundreds and thousands of Persians for 3 days. Sure, a few thousand Greeks from other cities and their Helot subjects were a big help, yet the Spartan spirit was key. Not for nothing did they live in barracks, even during times of peace. And the third reason was the fleet. Several years prior to the invasion, silver deposits had been found near Athens. This windfall might have been spent on anything, but it was decided to put it towards the construction of 200 triremes, fast and maneuverable warships with 3 rows of oars. Thanks to this new naval force, the Greeks broke the Persians in a decisive naval battle. A counter-offensive began. The Greeks of Sicily defeated their old rival, Carthage. A scattered array of forces thus defended the territory in which classical Greek culture was born. To permanently defeat Persia and liberate the cities in Asia, Athens founded a maritime union. Finally, Athens had become the center of the Greek world. 150 cities agreed to make annual payments for the maintenance of a common army and navy. The treasure was kept on Delos, the sacred island of Apollo. Shortly afterwards, however, patronage was passed to Athene, motivated by greater fiscal reliability, of course. Little imagination is required to suppose which polis was chosen for her headquarters. The most elite real estate in the 5th century BC was the Parthenon. It was constructed not so much as a temple, but as a kind of central bank, housing all the allied treasury. Without these funds, the Greek classics wouldn't have existed at all. No sculpture, drama, philosophy. The strategist and orator Pericles became the head of this new financial center. He concluded a 30 years peace with Sparta, restored the Acropolis that had been sacked by the Persians, and extended fortress walls to the city harbor. This was rebuilt to a grid layout, a forerunner to New York. While the sculptor Phidias was immortalizing Greece in stone, the philosopher Anaxagoras expressed an outrageous idea that the sun was not the god Hellas, but a burning body equal in size to Peloponnese. A whole great culture was created in half a century. Sparta and its allies grew jealous of Athens' prosperity. A Cold War had smoldered between them ever since the victory over the Persians, and things warmed up in 431 BC. The Spartans and their allies besieged impregnable Athens. Its inhabitants took cover behind the walls. The grain supply from Africa was cut off, and those shipments that made it through brought either typhus or the plague. Even Pericles himself perished. He was replaced by demagogues. Whoever promised the most was elected strategist. So Alcibiades, the unscrupulous nephew of Pericles, became the head of the Athenian armed forces. He proposed a short but victorious war. Let's pack it all in and sail for Sicily, as if the altercations with Sparta weren't enough. The fleet was ready, but something inexplicable happened the night before the voyage. All around the city, someone smashed off the most prominent parts of the Hermes statues. Alcibiades was accused of provocation, but he fled to Sparta to beg political asylum. The chief strategist then proceeded to advise the enemy. The allies began to drop out one by one. Athens agreed to a humiliating peace with the condition of demolishing its defensive walls. They had targeted Hermes, and the might of Athens was crushed. On the bright side, this was the heyday for Greek tragedy and comedy. Aeschylus, Sophocles, and Euripides, the three great tragedians, and the comedic playwright Aristophanes created plays that are still relevant today. And yet they penned them in the full confidence that the first production would be the last, as was the way in theatre at the time. Classical drama was always about current events, and while things may have been getting worse in the city, culture flourished. There was no winner in the Peloponnesian War. All Greek cities fell into decline. On the other hand, unexpected surprises would come from the Macedonians, distant relatives of the Greeks who had always been regarded as semi-barbarians. And then even the great philosopher Aristotle went to work in Macedonia as tutor to an extremely talented boy. The boy's father was Philip II. It was he who built up the Macedonian kingdom, defeating a Greek coalition. He almost managed to unite Greece in order to fight the Persians. But Philip was killed, and his son, known to us as Alexander the Great, blazed his way through Asia, broke the army of the Persian king Darius, but still refused to turn back, reaching India. Thus, a new world was born, the Hellenistic world. Greek and Eastern culture blended to form a new whole, as cities by the name of Alexandria sprang up in almost every land, though without any democracy. All officials in Asia spoke Greek, and new Oriental gods became neighbors with the old Greek ones at Mount Olympus. Alexander was proclaimed a god himself in Egypt. Protocol obliged all to follow Eastern tradition and fall at his feet. We can only wonder at how this might have ended. Greek decrees have been found urging the spread of Buddhism, but Alexander died young. Babylon, the place of his death, had become the capital of an empire, which immediately began to crack at the seams. While the successors of Alexander warred with one another, a new ambitious power was growing in the West. In 146 BC, the Romans conquered Greece, and in 30 BC, they conquered the last stronghold of Hellenism, Egypt. But Greek culture was victorious even here. Spread by the Romans, it finally conquered the world. Romans began to read the Iliad and Odyssey in Greek, followed by the Greek New Testament too. In 330, Emperor Constantine built a new city on the site of the old Greek colony of Byzantium, Constantinople. This was the starting point for the history of the Byzantine Empire, which extended the life of Greek culture another 1,000 years, leaving us the weird Russian alphabet, for instance.
Now, here I have the exercise. Here is the exercise. Pause again, up to this far, pause, and follow through the questions, understand the questions, and copy them somewhere. Try to attempt these questions. So I hope you have enjoyed even that video and you have followed through. You have made a comparison to what we have discussed and what was there in the video. Of course, there are many things there in the video, but then I hope you have been following. Now you know about the Greek civilization. These things about the Greeks, when you go to secondary school, right in Form 1, you are also going to find about the Greeks. So if you understand them better now, when you go to secondary school, you will enjoy them further. So follow through and answer these questions. So next time, we are going to meet again, and as we meet, we are going to look at Unit 8, and this one is Mineral Resources of the World. Mineral Resources of the World. So be there next time as we look at Unit 8, and until next time, thank you so much.